I arrived in Willow's End just as the last light drained from the sky, the kind of dusk that makes you question what's hiding in the shadows. My car's headlights cut through the mist curling along the empty main street, illuminating shuttered windows and hand-painted signs. The town looked like it had been forgotten by time, or maybe it had chosen to forget the world. I parked in front of the clinic, a squat brick building with a faded red cross above the door, and stepped out into the cold. The air smelled of pine and something faintly metallic, like old blood. A single figure waited for me on the steps, a woman in scrubs, her face drawn and pale. "You must be Dr. Lane," she said, voice low. "I'm Nurse Harper. We're glad you made it before dark." She didn't offer her hand. Instead, she glanced over her shoulder at the deepening night, as if expecting something to emerge from it. Inside, the clinic was clean but old, the kind of place where every creak in the floorboards had a story. Harper handed me a set of keys and a thick envelope. "You'll want to read these before your first night shift," she said. "The rules have changed again." I frowned, but she was already locking the door behind us, her hands trembling just enough for me to notice. As I followed her down the dim hallway, I caught sight of a notice board covered in handwritten notes. At the top, in bold red ink, someone had scrawled, "New nighttime rules, stricter enforcement." I didn't know what that meant yet, but the way Harper's eyes lingered on the board made my skin prickle. Something in this town was waiting for me to make a mistake. Nurse Harper led me through the clinic, her footsteps echoing in the quiet halls. The place was small, just 3 exam rooms, a cramped office, and a supply closet that doubled as a break room. She introduced me to the night janitor, Mr. Ellis, a stooped man with a limp and a habit of glancing nervously at the windows. "Don't mind me, Doc," he muttered, eyes fixed on the floor. "Just here to keep things tidy. You'll get used to the quiet." In the main office, Harper handed me a mug of coffee and gestured to a battered couch. "You'll meet most of the town at the clinic eventually," she said. "But tonight, it's just us and Sheriff Dalton. He likes to check in after dark." As if on cue, the sheriff appeared in the doorway, broad-shouldered and weathered, his uniform crisp but his eyes tired. "Welcome to Willow's End, Dr. Lane," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that lingered a second too long. "You'll find folks here are particular about routines." Harper slid the thick envelope across the table. "These are the nighttime rules. They're not official policy, but everyone follows them." I opened the envelope and scanned the list inside. No house calls after sunset. All windows must be covered by 8 p.m. Never answer the clinic door between midnight and 5 a.m., no matter who's knocking. If the phone rings 3 times in a row, do not pick up. The rules went on, each more bizarre than the last. I tried to laugh it off. Is this some kind of local tradition? Like hazing for the new doctor? Harper's lips twitched, but she didn't smile. "You could say that, but it's better to follow them, just in case." Sheriff Dalton's gaze was steady. "People here have long memories. Document. We don't take chances at night." As the tour ended, Harper paused by the back door, her hand resting on the lock. "The rules weren't always this strict," she said quietly. "But things changed last winter. Just don't question them too much. Not if you want to last." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unfinished, as the wind rattled the clinic's old windows. My first night on call started quietly enough. I reviewed patient files, organized supplies, and tried to ignore the way the building seemed to settle deeper into the earth as darkness fell. Harper brewed tea in the break room, humming a lullaby under her breath. Mr. Ellis mopped the hallway, his radio playing old country songs so softly it was more static than music. For a while, it felt like any other small-town clinic, mundane, almost peaceful. At 8:15 p.m., I was finishing notes when a sharp knock echoed from the front entrance. I glanced at the clock, then at the list of rules taped to my desk. Never answer the clinic door between midnight and 5 a.m., no matter who's knocking. It was early, but the unease in my chest was immediate. Harper poked her head in, her face pale. "Don't open it," she whispered. "We're closed for the night." The knocking came again, louder this time. A woman's voice, muffled but urgent, called out, "Please, I need help. My son, he's burning up. I think it's his appendix." Instinct warred with caution. Every part of my training screamed to help, but Harper's hand gripped my arm. "If it's real, they'll call the sheriff. No one comes to the clinic after dark unless they have no other choice. And no one knocks twice." I hesitated, torn between the Hippocratic Oath and the town's strange customs. The voice outside grew more desperate, pleading, sobbing. I took a step toward the door, but Harper's grip tightened. "Listen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not always who you think it is." The knocking stopped. Silence pressed in, thick and unnatural. I waited, heart pounding, but nothing happened. After a minute, Harper released my arm. "You did the right thing," she said, though her eyes were haunted. "Sometimes the rules are all that keep us safe." The rest of the night passed in uneasy quiet. I tried to focus on paperwork, but every creak of the building made me jump. When dawn finally broke, the clinic felt normal again, sunlight streaming through the windows, the smell of fresh coffee in the air, Harper chatting with Mr. Ellis about the weather. But I couldn't shake the memory of that voice, or the way it had sounded so real, so desperate. I wondered if I'd failed someone, or if I'd narrowly avoided something much worse. The line between normal and nightmare in Willow's Inn was already starting to blur. Days in Willow's Inn were deceptively ordinary. I made my rounds, checked on elderly patients, stitched up a farmer's hand after a mishap with a hay baler. The townsfolk were polite but distant, their conversations clipped, their eyes always flicking to the horizon as dusk approached. By the end of my first week, I'd memorized the faces and the rhythms of the town, but the nights were a different story. Every evening, Harper would double-check the blackout curtains, making sure not a sliver of light escaped. Mr. Ellis would sweep the porch, then wedge a heavy chair under the back door handle. The phone in my office was unplugged at 7:59 p.m. sharp. I followed along, feeling foolish but unwilling to be the one who broke the chain. The rules, once laughable, began to feel like a ritual, one I didn't fully understand but couldn't ignore. It was the little things that unsettled me most. The way the streetlights flickered and died at exactly 8:03 each night. The stray dog that circled the clinic, always silent, always watching. The children who drew pictures in the waiting room, crude shapes with too many eyes, houses with windows painted black, stick figures standing in the dark. When I asked about the drawings, Harper just shrugged. "Kids have wild imaginations," she said, but her voice was too tight. One afternoon, I found Sheriff Dalton in the lobby, staring at the rules posted on the wall. He didn't notice me at first, just traced his finger over a line near the bottom. "Never go near the old well after sunset." When he realized I was watching, he cleared his throat. "Some rules are older than others," he said. "Some we don't talk about. Best to leave them alone." That night, as I locked up, I caught Harper staring out the window, her face reflected in the glass. "There's one rule missing from the list," she murmured, almost to herself. "But maybe it's better that way." Before I could ask, She turned away, busying herself with paperwork. I tried to sleep, but the silence pressed in, broken only by the distant sound of something moving through the trees. I wondered what rule was so terrible it couldn't be written down, and why everyone in Willow's End seemed to be waiting for something to happen. The routines gave comfort, but beneath them, I sensed a fear that was growing stronger with every night. The day started like any other. I spent the morning checking on Mrs. Callahan's blood pressure and refilling prescriptions for the town's regulars. By afternoon, the sky had turned a bruised gray, and a cold wind rattled the clinic's windows. Harper made soup in the break room, humming that same lullaby, and Mr. Ellis polished the floors until they shone. The sense of routine was almost comforting, a fragile normalcy I clung to as the sun slipped behind the hills. Just before dusk, a frantic banging shattered the calm. I rushed to the front, nearly colliding with Harper, who was already reaching for the lock. On the other side of the glass stood Tom Grady, a burly farmer with wild eyes and a child clutched in his arms. "Please, Doc, you have to help her," he shouted, voice cracking. "She's burning up. Can't breathe, please." I hesitated, glancing at the clock. It was 8:10 p.m. The rules were clear: no house calls after sunset, no exceptions. But the girl's face was flushed, her breath shallow and rapid. My medical instincts screamed at me to act. Harper's hand landed on my shoulder, her grip iron. "We can't," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not now? Not after dark." Tom's desperation cut through my resolve. "If you won't come, I'll take her to the old well. Maybe whatever's out there will show more mercy than you." The threat was empty, but the pain in his eyes was real. Against every warning, I grabbed my bag and followed him into the night. The town was eerily silent as we hurried down the empty street. Every window was dark, every door bolted tight. The only sound was the girl's ragged breathing and the crunch of gravel under our feet. Tom's house was on the edge of town, a squat farmhouse surrounded by tangled weeds. Inside, the air was thick with fear. Tom's wife hovered in the kitchen, wringing her hands, while I examined the girl by the flickering light of an oil lamp. She had a high fever, but it wasn't appendicitis, just a bad case of croup. I gave her medicine, propped her up, and reassured her parents. Relief washed over their faces, and for a moment, the house felt safe, almost normal. I packed my bag, ready to return to the clinic, when a low, guttural sound echoed from outside. Tom's wife froze. "It's too late," she whispered. "You shouldn't have come." The lights flickered, then died. Shadows pressed against the windows, moving in ways that made my skin crawl. Something scraped along the walls, slow and deliberate. Tom grabbed a shotgun, but his hands shook so badly he could barely hold it. The girl whimpered, burying her face in her mother's lap. I edged toward the door, heart pounding. The rules flashed through my mind. Never leave the clinic after dark, never answer a knock, never go near the old well. I'd broken the first, and now something was here to collect the debt. A shape appeared at the window, tall and thin, its face a blur of shifting features. It tapped on the glass, each tap perfectly timed, like a metronome counting down. Tom raised the gun, but the thing only smiled, a wide, impossible grin that stretched from ear to ear. I grabbed Tom's arm, pulling him and his family into the back room. We huddled together, listening as the thing circled the house, its footsteps impossibly light. Minutes felt like hours. Then, as suddenly as it began, the scraping stopped. Silence returned, heavy and absolute. When I finally dared to look outside, the yard was empty. But Tom's wife was gone, vanished without a sound. The girl sobbed, clutching her father, while Tom stared at the empty doorway, his face hollow. I stumbled back to the clinic at dawn, shaken and exhausted. Harper met me at the door, her eyes red from crying. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just handed me a new list of rules, one more than before. The line between normal and nightmare had been crossed, and there was no going back. After that night, Harper barely spoke to me for 2 days. She moved through the clinic like a ghost, her eyes shadowed, her voice flat. I tried to apologize, but she only shook her head and busied herself with charts. It wasn't until the third evening, as we sat in the break room with untouched mugs of tea, that she finally broke the silence. "I wasn't always this way," she began, staring into her cup. "When I first came to Willow's End, I thought the rules were just old superstitions. I laughed at them, ignored them. The first winter, I stayed late at the clinic, walked home after midnight. I thought nothing of it. That's when I saw it, something tall, pale, moving between the trees. It followed me all the way to my door, but I made it inside, locked up tight. I thought I was safe." She paused, her hands trembling. The next morning, my neighbor was gone. No sign of a struggle, just her slippers on the porch and the door swinging open. After that, the rules got stricter. People started disappearing if they broke them. The sheriff tried to fight it, tried to organize patrols, but it only made things worse. The more we resisted, the more the rules changed. It was like the town was being watched, tested. I listened, the weight of her words settling over me. "What are they?" I asked quietly. "The things outside?" Harper shook her head. "No one knows. Some say they're spirits. Others say there's something older, something that was here before the town. All I know is the rules keep them at bay. But every time someone breaks one, the rules get longer, harder. It's like we're bargaining with something that never really wanted peace." She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's one rule that's never been broken. It's not written down, not spoken aloud. The elders say if it ever is, the town won't survive the night. I don't even know what it is, but I can feel it, like a shadow at the edge of my mind." I shivered, suddenly aware of how fragile our safety was. Harper looked at me, her eyes haunted. "If the rules ever stop working, if the list ever runs out of space, promise me you'll run. Don't look back. Some things can't be bargained with forever." The next week brought a storm that battered Willow's End with relentless rain and wind. Power lines snapped, plunging the town into darkness. The clinic's generator sputtered to life, casting the halls in a sickly yellow glow. Harper and I worked by flashlight, tending to a steady trickle of minor injuries, slips, cuts, and a broken wrist. The rules felt more urgent than ever, each one a lifeline in the chaos. That night, the phone rang 3 times in a row. I froze, remembering the rule. If the phone rings 3 times in a row, do not pick up. Harper's face went white. We let it ring, the sound echoing through the clinic like a warning bell. When it finally stopped, the silence was worse. A few minutes later, someone pounded on the back door. Mr. Ellis, who'd been mopping the hallway, looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "No one uses that door after dark," he whispered. The pounding grew more frantic, accompanied by a voice, Sheriff Dalton, or at least it sounded like him. "Open up. It's an emergency. Please, let me in." I hesitated, every instinct screaming to help, but Harper shook her head. "We can't risk it. Not tonight." The handle twisted, the door creaked open an inch, and a shadow slipped inside. I held my breath, paralyzed, as the darkness crept closer. The last thing I heard was the voice, right beside my ear. You can't save them all. The shadow filled the room, swallowing the weak beam of my flashlight. Harper and Mr. Ellis pressed against the far wall, their faces pale and terrified. I stood frozen, every muscle locked, as the darkness seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The voice came again, softer now, almost gentle. You broke the rules, Doctor. What will you give to make it right? I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. The shadow shifted, coalescing into a shape that was almost human, tall, thin, with eyes that glowed faintly in the gloom. It reached out a hand, impossibly long fingers curling toward me. One must pay, it whispered. A life for a life, or the rules will change again. Behind me, Harper whimpered. Mr. Ellis clutched his chest, gasping for breath. I thought of Tom Grady's wife, vanished into the night because I'd chosen to help. I thought of the girl I'd saved, the townsfolk who depended on me, the oath I'd sworn to do no harm. But the rules had never cared about compassion. They demanded obedience, not mercy. The entity's hand hovered inches from my face. Choose, it said. Give me one, and the rest may go free. Refuse, and the town will suffer. Its eyes flickered, reflecting every fear I'd tried to bury since arriving in Willow's End. I looked at Harper, who shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. Don't, she whispered. Don't give it what it wants. Mr. Ellis slumped to the floor, his breathing ragged. I knelt beside him, feeling helpless. The entity watched, patient, as if it had all the time in the world. A memory surfaced, Harper's words in the break room, the rule that was never written down. Was this it? Was this the test no one dared to speak of? I realized then that the rules weren't just about survival. They were about sacrifice, about what you were willing to lose to keep the darkness at bay. The entity leaned closer, its breath icy on my skin. Time is running out, Doctor. Choose. I closed my eyes, searching for an answer. If I sacrificed one of them, I might save the rest of the town for now. But the rules would only grow stricter, the demands greater. If I refused, the entity might take us all, or worse, unleash its hunger on everyone in Willow's End. Compassion and survival were at war inside me, tearing me apart. I stood, facing the shadow. Take me, I said, my voice shaking. Let them go. I broke the rules. I'll pay the price. The entity paused, considering. For a moment, I thought it would accept. But then it smiled, a cold, inhuman expression. Not yet, it whispered. You're not finished here. The town still needs its doctor. But remember this night. The rules are not for your protection. They are for me. With that, the shadow receded, slipping out the door and into the darkness beyond. The temperature rose, the air cleared, and the lights flickered back to life. Harper collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Mr. Ellis coughed, color returning to his cheeks. I stood in the center of the room, shaking, the weight of my choice pressing down on me. I had survived, but at what cost? The rules had been tested, bent, but not broken. I knew now that compassion had a price in Willow's End, and that price was always rising. As dawn crept through the clinic windows, I realized the entity had left me with something worse than fear, a sense of responsibility, and the knowledge that next time, the choice might not be mine to make. Morning came slowly, gray and cold, as if the sun itself was reluctant to rise over Willow's End. The clinic was a mess, broken glass, overturned chairs, muddy footprints that faded before my eyes. Harper and Mr. Ellis slept fitfully in the break room, exhaustion etched into their faces. I wandered the halls, numb, replaying the night's events in my mind. Every shadow seemed to linger a little too long. Every sound made me flinch. I found the list of rules on my desk, now with another line added in the same red ink. Never forget what you owe. My hands shook as I read it. The rules weren't just guidelines anymore. They were law, and I understood now that breaking them meant more than just personal risk. The town's safety, its very existence, depended on our obedience. When Harper woke, she didn't speak of what we'd seen. She just handed me a cup of coffee and sat beside me in silence. Mr. Ellis left before sunrise, muttering about repairs and the need to keep busy. The townsfolk would come soon, asking questions I couldn't answer, looking for reassurance I no longer felt capable of giving. I looked out the window at the empty street, the boarded-up houses, the old well at the edge of town. I wondered how many more rules would be added, how many more sacrifices would be demanded before the darkness was satisfied. I wondered if the entity was watching me even now, waiting for the next mistake. As I sipped my coffee, I realized I was no longer an outsider. I was part of Willow's End, bound by its rules and its secrets. The fear hadn't left me, but it had changed shape, less a sharp pain, more a constant ache, a reminder that the worst was never truly over. Somewhere in the distance, a dog began to howl. I listened, heart pounding, and waited for the next rule to appear. A month passed, and the rhythm of Willow's End settled into my bones. I learned to live by the rules, to check the locks twice, to draw the curtains before dusk, and to never answer a knock after midnight. The townsfolk grew used to my presence, their guarded nods softening into brief smiles, but the fear in their eyes never faded. I became part of the town's uneasy truce with the night, a keeper of secrets and silent bargains. One morning, a letter arrived from the county hospital. They were sending a new doctor, a recent graduate eager for rural experience. I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. I spent the next few days preparing the clinic, restocking supplies, and writing notes for my replacement. But the most important thing I prepared was the list of rules, rewritten in my own hand, each line underlined in red. When Dr. Patel arrived, she was bright-eyed and full of questions, her optimism a sharp contrast to the town's wary silence. I gave her the tour, introduced her to Harper and Mr. Ellis, and watched as she laughed at the quirks of small-town life. In the office, I handed her the envelope. "You'll want to read these before your first night shift," I said, echoing Harper's words from my own arrival. She glanced at the list, eyebrows raised. "Is this a joke? Some kind of initiation?" I shook my head, unable to muster a smile. "Just follow them, even if they don't make sense. Especially then." She shrugged, tucking the envelope into her bag, already distracted by the day's appointments. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I stood outside the clinic, suitcase in hand. Harper hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thank you for staying as long as you did." Mr. Ellis nodded, his eyes shining with something like respect. I looked back at the building, its windows glowing softly in the dusk, and felt the weight of everything I was leaving behind. As I drove out of town, the road winding through endless forest, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw a tall, thin shadow standing by the old well, watching me go. I blinked, and it was gone, swallowed by the trees. The rules would keep Dr. Patel safe, if she believed in them soon enough. But as the night closed in behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that the list would grow longer, the price steeper, and that Willow's End would never truly be free. Somewhere, just out of sight, Something was waiting for the next mistake.